This program is sponsored by the Durrell Institute, a division of the Harry F. Byrd Jr. School of Business at Shenandoah University. The Durrell Institute is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to education in the areas of history, economics, political science, law, and related disciplines concerning money and banking in the United States.
We don't often think about it, but virtually everything we do all day, every day, is determined by economic forces. All of our days are a series of choices, each with an economic impact, because each choice we make is a decision on how to spend our time. And as you've probably heard, time is money. If you're a student and you choose to do your homework instead of watching TV or doing something else you enjoy, you've made an economic decision. Studying represents a choice or a trade-off between the benefits of studying and the satisfaction and enjoyment you could gain from some other activity, or from the money you could have made by working instead. I hate to be the one to break the news to you, but you can't do everything you want, so you're forced to make choices. In fact, no one has the time, money, energy, knowledge, talent, and good luck to satisfy every possible desire, because we all live in an environment of scarcity. Scarcity exists everywhere because resources are limited. The entire planet, as we are increasingly aware, has limited resources. Virtually everything is scarce. Can you think of anything that isn't? Even air, although it seems so plentiful and available to everyone, is scarce these days, and it costs plenty to keep it clean. Another way to think about it is that anything that has a price is scarce. The more scarce it is, the higher the price. Think about it. Because every decision you make is, in some sense, an economic decision, understanding economics will help you make better choices as you go about the business of everyday life. Another way to think more logically about scarcity and the choices it forces us to make is by using an economist tool called opportunity cost. Understanding this idea is crucial to understanding business economics. In fact, it's the basis for almost all economic theories. When you get right down to it, everything we do involves a decision to pass up the opportunity to do something else. Since you're here watching this, you've already made an economic decision. Most likely it was that you've decided to go to school instead of doing something else, perhaps even working at a job. Suppose, for example, that you could be earning some money right now working somewhere. Then, generally speaking, the cost of being at school is the money you could have earned during the time you're here. You passed up an opportunity to make some money, to learn something about economics instead. So the cost of doing anything is equal to what we could have gotten out of doing something else, either in monetary terms or just in terms of the satisfaction you lost by not doing it. In economics, the value of anything is the value of the next best foregone opportunity, which is called its opportunity cost. Understanding opportunity costs helps us clarify decision-making, both in business and in our personal lives. Suppose you're wondering whether to go to college. What will it cost? Ask an accountant, and you'll probably hear that the cost will be the sum of the cost of tuition, fees, books, transportation, and so on. Those obviously are your direct costs. But ask an economist, and you'll hear that the cost of going to college will be much higher than you may have thought. In fact, it will equal all the things the accountant added up for you, plus the amount you could earn if you worked full-time instead of going to college. Anyone who works for a year, even at minimum wage of $4.25 an hour, will earn $8,840. Added to your other costs, that's not a small consideration. In economic terms, you're investing not only in the direct costs of tuition and so on, but you're also paying the indirect costs of foregoing the opportunity to work. Added together, these costs make going to college a lot more expensive than it looks. Of course, this is a short-run, long-run proposition. If you go to college, it's a pretty good bet your short-run investment will pay off in higher income in the long run. In a business context, an understanding of opportunity costs is crucial to all decisions. For example, suppose you own and operate a small business, let's say a grocery store. At the end of the year, your accountant adds up your total sales, and they equal $100,000, while your direct expenses are $80,000. Obviously, you've made a profit of $20,000. But your neighborhood economist would probably tell you, although it may look on paper as if you made a profit, in actual fact, you probably didn't. Why? Because you forgot to take into account your opportunity costs, the highest income you could have earned by working somewhere else. If you're a skilled grocery manager, chances are you could have earned more, say $30,000 working for some large grocery chain. That means, in fact, you've lost $10,000 in opportunity costs by being in business for yourself. In pure economic terms, this isn't a profitable business, and it won't be unless you increase your profits to the point that they equal your next best opportunity. That is, your opportunity costs. But of course, as a business owner, you need to factor in other considerations. Is the income you lost equal to the psychological satisfaction you gained from owning your own business? If it is, you've covered your opportunity costs. So when making rational decisions about how to spend your time, you might well be advised to think like an economist and ask yourself, is this course of action going to cover my opportunity costs? If it doesn't, then you're not making a rational economic decision. But there's more to opportunity costs than that. Opportunity costs show up in almost all the debates in Congress over how to allocate the limited federal budget. Do we want to spend $1 billion on building a new dam and water reclamation project? Then we have to give up building 2 stealth bombers. Do we want a national health care insurance program? Then we have to give up modernizing the interstate highway system, and so on. There are thousands of similar examples. Given that any society has limited resources, then any social choice involves opportunity costs or trade-offs. This is perhaps best illustrated by an important yet simple economist's model called a production possibility frontier. Any society faces a menu of choices as it allocates scarce resources to produce the goods and services it needs. In this case, the opportunity cost of producing more of one thing is producing less of another. Suppose we have a simple island economy where the 2 main industries are fishing and gathering coconuts. If the islanders devoted all their resources to fishing, they could catch 200 fish a week, but no coconuts would be harvested. Then suppose the group decided to assign some of their members to picking coconuts instead of fishing. They're able to pick 25 coconuts, but the number of fish caught falls to 180. So the real cost of that choice is the opportunity cost, losing 20 fish balanced by the gain of 25 coconuts. The group could also allocate resources to yield 150 fish and 50 coconuts, or 100 fish and 75 coconuts. Every change in the mix of resources involves the cost of other opportunities foregone. But whatever the case, the group can't produce beyond its production possibilities frontier because production is limited by available resources and technological know-how. This is the choice all societies face as they allocate limited resources among thousands of competing uses and opportunities. Now let's see what all this has to do with the basics of business economics and how our economy works. As you no doubt know, we live in an economic system called free market capitalism. In a free market system, anything can be produced. Whether it'll continue to be produced depends on how well it stands the test of the market. If consumers want the product and are willing to give up thousands of other consumption opportunities to buy it, then it'll be produced. If it doesn't sell, it won't be produced for very long. So in a capitalist free market system, the consumer ultimately makes the decision about what will be produced. That's called consumer sovereignty, because decisions about what to produce are dictated by consumers' desires, meaning the consumer is king or queen. Consumer sovereignty gives us what we want, because if we didn't want it badly enough to buy it, the product wouldn't be produced. So the free market gives us needed products like hospitals and automobiles, and some that are not so needed, like gambling casinos and illegal drugs. But whatever it is, it's the free market, not the government, that decides whether and for how long it will be produced. So it's the need to cater to the wants and needs of consumers that creates competition. Then competition spurs businesses on to improve their products and operate with greater productive efficiency so they can be sold as cheaply as possible at a competitive price. But wait, there's more to understanding the basics of business economics than that. Whenever goods and services are produced, 4 basic factors are involved: land, labor, capital, and the entrepreneurial skill to use them to produce goods and services. This is commonly called entrepreneurship. We need to look at these factors of production in some detail if we want to understand how business works. It's easy to understand that whenever anything is produced, a certain amount of space is needed to make it, or in the case of food, to grow it. However, the word land shouldn't be taken literally. It refers to much more than the land we walk on. In economics, land means climate, oceans, grazing land, rivers, harbors, and much more. Clearly, land is essential for production, whether we're talking about simple space or the natural resources that land provides. In any case, it's a very limited, scarce resource. There's only so much land in the world, and good land with fertile soil, mineral resources, or a good location for trade is even more limited. The second factor of production is labor. People must work if anything is to be produced. Imagine a society with leadership, equipment, plenty of land, but where no one is willing to work. Traditionally, however, labor has been the most plentiful of the factors of production. Labor is not just a willingness to work, but also the ability to work, that is, skill level. People can rent out a skill to an employer or use it to run their own business. Either way, labor has a value and a market price based on demand for various skills, just as land has a value based on the demand for its use. Capital, which is also needed for production, is a less obvious concept. Capital consists of physical capital, the buildings, machinery, and tools that are needed, whether it be a simple screwdriver or a complex computerized robot on an assembly line. But capital also refers to financial capital. That's the money that must be accumulated or borrowed to pay for the other factors of production until the product is sold. The fourth factor of production, entrepreneurship and managerial skill, is needed anytime the production of anything takes place. You don't just build an automobile in your garage. You need to know how. Entrepreneurship may be technical knowledge, or it may be managerial skill coupled with the willingness to take risks. But whatever it's called, it's still knowing how to organize the factors of production to accomplish a given goal. And that's a lot more complicated than it might look. To see why, let's look at the 4 factors of production in an enterprise as simple as, say, growing tomatoes in a pot on your deck. To grow tomatoes, you need some space on your deck. Tomato seeds, a pot, some soil, some water, fertilizer, insecticide, sun, a pole, string, some labor, some know-how, money to buy all this stuff, and the willingness to risk it on the project. So how do the 4 factors of production interact in this simple project? Land is the space we had to rent, so to speak, for the plant to grow. Labor is the time we spent working on planting and caring for the plant. Capital is 2 things. There's financial capital, the money we spent on the project, and there's physical capital, the physical things we had to buy, the pot, seeds, fertilizer, and so on. And entrepreneurship is the know-how and managerial skills we applied to the project, plus the risk we take of losing our money if things don't work out. The physical and financial process of producing almost anything, while it sounds simple, is really rather complicated. The owner or manager of any business has to decide what combination of inputs, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship or managerial skill, will provide the maximum output at least cost. Let's look at how this works from the input side. We know from experience that we can increase efficiency if several people are employed to work together, with each one specializing in one stage of the process. In a pizza parlor, for example, one cook can prepare the dough while another fixes the toppings, another watches the oven, and so on. By specializing, dividing up the tasks, they can produce more than they could working alone. However, these increases in productivity are lost after a certain point because the oven will only hold so many pizzas and because only so many cooks can work in one kitchen. Eventually, both productivity and efficiency are lost from having too many cooks in the kitchen. In other words, the business soon encounters the law of diminishing returns to its inputs. We can also see how the law of diminishing returns to inputs acts in our previous enterprise, growing tomatoes on the deck. Once you get set up, some of your inputs, the pot, seed, and soil, are fixed in the sense that they can't be varied. The pot is only so big and it will always remain the same size. The only problem remaining is to decide how much fertilizer, sun, and water are needed. If you want to grow the world's supply of tomatoes on your patio, it would seem to make sense to add as much fertilizer, sun, and water as you could find. But that doesn't work, because adding too much fertilizer, sun, or water will not only decrease our yield of tomatoes, it might even kill the plant. So as these inputs are added to a fixed plant size, the pot, they're subject to the law of diminishing returns. If they weren't, you in fact could grow the world's food supply in a flower pot, and food would not be scarce. To generalize from this example, we can say that at the level of a single business, factor inputs tend to be subject to diminishing returns whenever one factor is varied while the others are held constant. When diminishing returns set in, the total cost of production will increase at an increasing rate. More and more resources have to be added to the production process to get the equivalent increases in output. But to use more resources costs more. In the pizza parlor, we increased our labor input, while our other variables, land, capital, and entrepreneurship, remained the same. Over time, we get varying increases in outputs as we employ additional cooks. Total output increases rapidly at first, then more slowly in proportion to additional inputs. This is a common pattern in almost all production situations in the short run, whenever the input of one variable factor is increased while the others are held constant. So that's a problem all businesses face. At some point, diminishing returns cause costs to rise as production increases. That's why businesses will only increase production if the price of their product is increased. And it's the supply side of the business equation. The other side of the business equation is demand. How does a consumer make a rational decision about what to buy and what to pay for it? When you walk into a supermarket, you're faced with the interesting problem of choosing what to buy among some 50,000 to 100,000 different items on the shelves. Each item has a price. So how was that price established? First, think about why some things are so expensive, like salmon or steak, while others, like salt or flour, are so cheap. And why are those products there in the first place? Who decided which products would end up on supermarket shelves? As we learned earlier, the market decides, not the supermarket, the free market economy. In a free market, prices act as signals to all members of the economy. In the same way that a traffic light tells drivers when to stop, go, or slow down, prices tell buyers how scarce a product or factor may be. Also note that everyone is both a buyer and a seller, depending on what role they play in the cycle and when they play it. But different roles have different interests. As buyers, we want to buy at a low price, while as sellers, we want to sell at a high price. These opposing goals are moderated in the marketplace by the laws of supply and demand. In a demand context, prices tell us how scarce the product is relative to the demand for it. Of course, consumers will usually buy more of any given item if the price is reduced. But the question is, how much more? Business people conduct market research to help them predict how consumers will react to increases or decreases in prices. The resulting data can be plotted as a demand curve, which shows that as price is lowered, more can be sold. For example, if we were to study how we expect consumers to react to CD prices, our demand curve, which usually slopes downward, might look like this. If we price our CD at $24, we may only sell 1,000 of them. At $20, that number increases to 5,000. At $15, we could sell 10,000, and so on. That's because price and quantity demanded are inversely related. When price goes down, quantity demanded increases, and when price goes up, less will be demanded. The other side of the equation is supply. We now understand why consumers demand more at lower prices. But from a producer's point of view, it's a very different situation. So in a supply context, the question becomes, how much product are producers willing to supply? It should come as no surprise that producers are always willing to produce or supply more of any product if they think they can sell it for a higher price. As we saw earlier, diminishing returns cause costs to rise as production increases. As a result, businesses will only increase production if the price of their product is increased. This is the supply side of the business equation. Businesses, especially big ones, hire experts like accountants, economists, and engineers to analyze their production methods and determine exactly how much more it will cost to increase production by a specific quantity. Using that data, a supply curve can be constructed that generally slopes upward. As price increases, the quantity supplied will increase, and as price decreases, the quantity supplied will decrease. Now, let's combine these two opposing concepts to see how the forces of free market competition will sooner or later arrive at a market price. Using our CD example, let's combine the downward sloping demand curve with the upward sloping supply curve on one graph. Doing this shows us how the market arrives at a point where the demand curve crosses the supply curve. This point indicates the price and quantity that will satisfy both consumers and producers and optimize each of their best interests. This is commonly called the equilibrium price, which in this case is $12.50 for one CD. But remember that supply and demand are determined by different factors. Actors in the market are simply acting in their own self-interest. Buyers trying to economize and buy as cheaply as possible, while producers are trying to maximize their incomes by selling for as much as possible. In a free market, the competition between the buyers and the sellers, and the competition among the members of each group, eventually determines the actual market price at which the product will be sold, the prevailing market price. This is how the free market and capitalist system work. As we've seen, economics is the science of making choices. Everything we do involves opportunity costs or trade-offs, balancing our time and activities against limited resources. Just as we each individually make choices, businesses must also make choices. How to best distribute our limited resources as goods and services to consumers and still make a profit. Society as a whole must also make similar choices. As businesses make production choices, they must take into account opportunity costs, the cost of the next best foregone opportunity. Under a capitalist system, a free market economy allows the production and distribution of goods and services to be driven by consumer wants and needs. This is all done more efficiently because of competition. We saw that as we make choices about inputs to the production process, if one input remains constant, our output will be subject to diminishing returns. And we saw that although buyers want to buy at the cheapest possible price, while sellers want to sell at the highest possible price, the actual market price, or equilibrium price, is determined by the interaction of the forces of supply and demand. Underlying all these business concepts is a complex web of economic theory to help guide businesses as they participate in our free market economy, and to help you make better informed decisions and real-world choices as you go about the business of everyday life. That's something to consider the next time you have an economic decision to make, which should be right about now. Good luck.